Ever wondered how America became its own country? It all began with a simple demand: no taxation without representation. Now, to fully grasp this outcry, we need to delve into the heart of the American colonies in the 18th century. Picture this. The colonies, nestled under the mighty British Empire, are starting to feel the weight of their crown's expectations. The British, fresh from their victory in the 7 Years' War, are sitting on a mountain of debt and looking for ways to recover. Their solution? Taxes. And not just any taxes, but taxes imposed on the American colonies without their consent or representation in the British Parliament. Imagine being asked to pay for a meal you didn't order, or a service you didn't request. That's how the colonists felt. They were being taxed on everything from paper to tea, all without a say in the matter. It's no surprise that this stirred up a cauldron of discontent. And discontent has a way of brewing rebellion. The colonists, tired of being treated like the British Empire's cash cow, decided to voice their objections. This led to the birth of the famous slogan, "No taxation without representation." The phrase was more than just a catchy line. It was a rallying cry, a declaration of resistance against the unfair practices of the British Empire. One of the most significant acts of defiance was the Boston Tea Party. In December of 1773, a group of colonists, frustrated with the oppressive Tea Act, decided to take matters into their own hands. They boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston harbor. It was a bold, audacious act, a clear message to the British. The colonists had had enough. And so the spark was ignited. The American colonies began to question their British rulers, setting the stage for revolution. This was the birth of unrest, the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead to independence and the creation of a new nation, the United States of America. Frustrated and defiant, the American colonies decided to take a stand, leading to the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. It was the spring of 1775 when the tension that had been simmering between the American colonies and the British government reached its boiling point. The colonies had had enough of Britain's overbearing rule and their taxation without representation. It was time for action, and that action came in the form of the battles of Lexington and Concord. The battles that took place in these small Massachusetts towns were the first military engagements of the Revolutionary War. However, they were more than just battles. They were a statement, a declaration that the colonies would no longer be passive under the thumb of British rule. On April 19, 1775, British troops were dispatched from Boston to Concord with a mission to destroy the colonists' military supplies. However, the colonists were well prepared. Thanks to Paul Revere and his famous midnight ride, the Colonial militia, known as the Minutemen, were alerted of the British approach. The confrontation began in the early dawn at Lexington. The British, outnumbering the colonists, demanded their surrender. However, the Minutemen stood their ground. A shot was fired, it's still unknown from which side, and the Revolutionary War began. The British continued on to Concord, but by this time, the colonists were ready. The British were forced to retreat back to Boston, marking the first colonial victory of the war. These battles marked the beginning of open conflict between the colonies and Britain. They were a clear signal that the American people were willing to fight for their rights and their freedom. The battles of Lexington and Concord were the spark that ignited the Revolutionary War, a war that would eventually lead to the birth of a new nation. With the first shots fired, there was no turning back. The American Revolution was in full swing. As the war raged on, the American colonies made a bold move. They declared their independence from Britain. This was not a decision made lightly. It was a daring declaration, a proclamation of freedom that echoed across the Atlantic, reaching the halls of power in London. In the midst of this tumultuous time, a group of men, known today as the Founding Fathers, gathered in a hot, stuffy room in Philadelphia. Their mission was clear: draft a document that would articulate the colony's grievances against the British Crown and declare their independence. The task fell predominantly on the shoulders of a young, eloquent Virginian, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, a man of words and a strong advocate for liberty, took on the monumental task of putting the colony's yearning for freedom into words. He penned what would become one of the most famous documents in the world, the Declaration of Independence. In this document, Jefferson eloquently outlined the colony's grievances against King George III and Britain. He wrote of the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and declared that when a government fails to protect these rights, it is the duty of the people to alter or abolish it. But Jefferson did not work alone. Other key figures like Benjamin Franklin and John Adams played crucial roles in shaping the document. Together, they crafted a declaration that was both a statement of defiance against Britain and a proclamation of the ideals that would come to define the United States. On July 4, 1776, the final draft of the Declaration was adopted by the Continental Congress. With the stroke of a pen, 56 delegates representing the 13 colonies signed the Declaration of Independence. This audacious act was a clear and public declaration to the world that the American colonies were no longer subjects of the British Crown. With the stroke of a pen, the colonies declared themselves a free and independent nation. The stakes of the war had never been higher. This was no longer a rebellion. It was a revolution. And with their declaration, the American colonies had staked their claim for freedom and ignited a flame of liberty that continues to burn brightly to this day. The war was far from over, but a major victory gave the American colonies a glimmer of hope. Enter the Battle of Saratoga, a pivotal moment in the American Revolution. It was the autumn of 1777, and things weren't looking too bright for the American colonies. They were up against the might of the British Empire, and the odds were stacked high against them. But then, something unexpected happened. The British, led by General John Burgoyne, were planning to cut New England off from the other colonies. They were marching down from Canada, but to their surprise, they were met by a determined bunch of American troops at Saratoga, New York. The Americans, under the command of General Horatio Gates, put up a fierce fight. The first clash, the Battle of Freeman's Farm, was a bloody affair, with heavy losses on both sides. Yet the Americans held their ground. The second clash, the Battle of Bemis Heights, was the game changer. The American troops, boosted by the arrival of additional forces and the tactical genius of General Benedict Arnold, forced the British to retreat. Now, why was Saratoga such a big deal? Well, it was the first significant victory for the American colonies, and boy, did it boost their morale. They had just proven that they could stand up to one of the most powerful armies in the world and win. But the ripple effects of this victory didn't stop at the American shores. Across the Atlantic, in the grand halls of Versailles, the French were watching. They saw an opportunity to undermine their longtime rivals, the British. And so, moved by the American victory at Saratoga, they decided to join the fray, providing the American colonies with much-needed military support. The Battle of Saratoga was a decisive moment. It gave the colonies the momentum they needed to continue the fight. And with the tide turning in their favor, the American colonies were one step closer to becoming an independent nation. After years of conflict, the Revolutionary War finally came to an end, giving birth to a new nation. The year was 1783. The smoke cleared, and the sounds of gunfire slowly faded away. The Treaty of Paris was signed, marking the end of a long, tumultuous war and the beginning of a new era. The Treaty of Paris, a significant document, was the official stamp that confirmed the independence of the 13 American colonies from British rule. It was a beacon of hope, symbolizing a future where the people had the power to govern themselves. It was an end, yes, but more importantly, it was a new beginning. The Revolutionary War, a war that had raged for 8 long years, had finally come to a close. But the war was more than just a fight for freedom. It was a battle of ideas, a struggle for the right to self-governance, a cry for liberty, and a demand for justice. It was a war that had shaped and molded a nation. The end of the war saw the birth of the United States of America, a nation born out of conflict and founded on the principles of liberty and equality, a nation where the power rested in the hands of the people, where every voice mattered, a nation that was a beacon of hope for many, a symbol of freedom and opportunity. The birth of this new nation was not without its challenges. The young country had to navigate through uncharted waters, establish a working government, and form its own identity. But these challenges were seen not as obstacles, but as opportunities to grow and evolve. The United States of America, a nation that emerged from the ashes of war, was now ready to write its own story. It was ready to carve out its own path, to create its own destiny, a nation that was, and still is, a symbol of hope, opportunity, and freedom. And so, through years of struggle and sacrifice, America became its own country. That's the story of the American Revolution. A nation born from conflict, shaped by the ideals of liberty and justice, and driven by the spirit of its people. The birth of a nation indeed.